124 million years ago, the prehistoric canopy was a hunting ground. Early terrestrial ecosystems were heavily populated by predatory wasps, like the Amoplanidae, who patrolled the leaves of ancient gymnosperms searching for smaller insects. But the broader landscape was undergoing a massive transition. The dominant, non-flowering seed plants were gradually being crowded out by a new botanical architecture, angiosperms, or flowering plants. To reproduce, these new flowers produced massive quantities of nutrient-rich pollen. As wasp larvae fed on prey that had been foraging inside these early blooms, they inadvertently consumed the thick dustum of pollen coating their victims. This accidental protein substitute proved highly efficient. Over generations, a subset of these early hunters stopped expending energy chasing prey entirely. They adapted their bodies and behaviors to harvest the stationary, protein-dense pollen instead. By abandoning carnivory, these specialized wasps became the first bees. They established a mutualistic loop of pollination and food production that changed the efficiency of terrestrial food webs, providing flowering plants the reproductive advantage they needed to spread across the planet. As flowering plants diversified their shapes, colors, and bloom times to attract visitors, bees adapted in tandem. Through a process of adaptive radiation, they rapidly split into thousands of specialized forms, each evolved to exploit specific floral mechanics. This biological divergence pushed their physical architecture to extreme limits. A dwarf stingless bee measures barely 2 millimeters long, while Wallace's giant bee stretches to nearly 40 millimeters. To date, taxonomists have cataloged over 20,000 distinct species across the globe. Yet statistical models indicate that up to 25% of global bee diversity still remains entirely undiscovered, hidden largely in undersampled regions of Asia and Africa. Bees comprise a sprawling biological dynasty that has spent millions of years evolving in synchronization with the botanical world. To efficiently extract vital resources from modern flowers, the individual bee operates with a suite of highly refined biological hardware. Unlike the smooth armor of their wasp ancestors, their bodies are covered in branched plumose hairs. As a bee flies through the air, it builds up a positive electrostatic charge, allowing these specialized hairs to attract and trap negatively charged pollen grains directly from a flower. Navigation relies on a split visual system. Two massive compound eyes process ultraviolet light patterns on petals, patterns invisible to humans, while three simple eyes, called ocelli, sit at the top of the head to measure light intensity and stabilize flight. When they take off, their two pairs of wings physically interlock. Tiny hooks called hemuli latch the forewings and hindwings together, forming a single, rigid aerodynamic surface. To carry nectar payloads that often rival their own body weight, they rotate their wings in a complex figure-8 pattern at over 200 Hz, generating swirling air vortices that create lift. Every microscopic detail of their anatomy is an engineering solution to the precise physics problem of transporting heavy botanical cargo through the air. Inside the hive, the individual insect contributes to a singular, unified superorganism. This entity breathes. Worker bees position themselves at the entrance, actively fanning air in distinct inhalations and exhalations. In one single minute, a large honeybee colony cycles the exact same volume of oxygen as a resting domestic cat. It also regulates its own internal climate. By clustering together and rapidly vibrating their flight muscles, thousands of workers generate enough ambient heat to maintain a constant 93-degree Fahrenheit core temperature, regardless of the weather outside. This thermal stability allows them to construct massive, exposed wax architectures. Humans have scaled sheer rock faces for thousands of years to plunder the immense honey stores suspended within these giant wild nests. The cells within these nests are populated by a strict caste system driven by diet. Larvae fed exclusively on royal jelly undergo an endocrine reaction that forges a reproductive queen, while those on a standard diet develop into sterile female workers or male drones. The colony functions as a singular biological entity, where the actions of thousands of individual bees aggregate into the behavior of a single warm-blooded organism. Coordinating tens of thousands of individuals in the total darkness of a hive presents a massive logistical challenge, especially without a central command structure. To solve this, the hive runs on an invisible operating system. They rely on a complex network of chemical pheromones, that cascade through the air, triggering immediate, programmed behavioral responses across the entire population. The queen mandibular pheromone suppresses workers' reproductive capabilities and signals that the hive is healthy. If a bee senses a threat, she releases an isoamyl acetate alarm pheromone, which smells like bananas, instantly rallying nearby workers to attack. This distributed chemical network manages the colony's logistics without requiring a central authority. Chemical signals work for internal nest coordination, but they cannot transmit geographic data when a forager locates a rich nectar source miles away. To recruit nest mates to a distant location, returning foragers execute the waggle dance. Outside of human speech, it is the only known abstract spatial language in the natural world. The dance encodes GPS coordinates. The central wagging run's duration correlates precisely to the target's distance. For direction, the bee transposes the horizontal angle of the food relative to the sun onto the vertical axis of the honeycomb, using gravity as a reference point. This geometric translation is more than hardwired instinct. It is a cultural phenomenon. Young bees must observe and practice with experienced elders to perform the dance accurately. Over 124 million years, a carnivorous wasp evolved into a specialized pollinator. The modern bee represents some masterpiece of biological engineering, an insect capable of abstract communication, social learning, and the maintenance of the world's flowering ecosystems. Every time a bee dives into a blossom, it executes a precise mechanical exchange. This biological transaction is the physical force driving the human food system. This is the cover of a report by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. It serves as the baseline for understanding the intersection of wild ecosystems and global agriculture. This chart shows the annual value of crops attributable to animal pollinators, reaching $577 billion. By volume, over 75% of leading food crops depend on this system, taking up a third of all agricultural land. While staple grains like wheat and corn are wind-pollinated, the diversity and nutritional quality of our global diet rest on this delicate, unpaid labor force. In the Amazon rainforest, relationships between plants and insects are highly specialized. Many trees here evolved complex structures that strictly limit access to their pollen. The Brazil nut tree is one example. It grows wild in the Amazon, producing thousands of tons of nuts for export, but it cannot be grown in plantations because its flowers can only be pollinated by a single insect, the small, shining Euglossia bee. Other plants require a mechanical technique called buzz pollination, or sonication. The bee bites the flower and vibrates its flight muscles at a high frequency, literally shaking the pollen out of restrictive anthers. Commercial agriculture exploits this specific behavior. Greenhouse tomato growers rely heavily on bumblebees because tomatoes require sonication to release their pollen, and honeybees do not possess the ability to buzz pollinate. This illustration shows the southeastern blueberry bee visiting tubular blossoms. Its body fits the flower perfectly, allowing it to use sonication to harvest pollen far more efficiently than other visiting insects. This level of mutual adaptation guarantees efficient reproduction for the plant and an exclusive food source for the insect, but it also creates a catastrophic vulnerability. If a specific pollinator species declines, the plant loses its ability to reproduce. In 2006, beekeepers began reporting that adult worker bees suddenly vanished, leaving behind a live queen and healthy brood. This is colony collapse disorder. Research points to a compounding series of biological stressors, starting with the invasive Varroa destructor mite. The mite attaches to the bee and feeds directly on its fat bodies, weakening the host's physical health. This diagram illustrates how the mite acts as a vector, transmitting pathogens like deformed wing virus directly into the bloodstream. The viral load replicates exponentially within the hive's dense confines, crippling the nurse bee's immune systems and accelerating death until the colony collapses. A hive rarely fails from a single pathogen. Colony collapse disorder is the terminal result of synergistic stressors completely overwhelming the hive's collective immunity. Beyond biological parasites, bee populations navigate an environment saturated with agricultural chemicals, most notably a class of systemic pesticides known as neonicotinoids. While a high dose is immediately lethal, the wider danger lies in sublethal exposure. These neurotoxins interact with the central nervous system, impairing short-term memory. A honeybee colony relies on precise spatial data communicated through the waggle dance to locate food sources. Neonicotinoid exposure scrambles these internal coordinates. Foragers leave the hive to gather nectar and lose their orientation in the field. Unable to navigate back, they die alone. This mechanical failure of navigation explains the empty hives characteristic of colony collapse disorder. Systemic pesticides dismantle the colony's ability to coordinate, turning a sophisticated navigation network into a collection of lost, disoriented individuals. Managed honeybees are only a fraction of the story. The vast majority of the world's 20,000 bee species are wild and solitary, and they face a completely different set of environmental pressures. This image shows the exposed ground-level entrance used by mining bees. Because these solitary species nest in open soil, their habitats are uniquely vulnerable to land development and tilling. This photograph highlights the glossy abdomen of a carpenter bee, which distinguishes it from its fuzzier bumblebee relatives. These wild pollinators rely on natural architecture like dead wood and stems to survive. Solitary bees do not have tens of thousands of workers to defend a nest, nor do they stockpile honey to survive lean seasons. This lack of collective numbers makes them exponentially more vulnerable to habitat loss. This is a NASA Mission Control Center, where satellite data is used to monitor global plant biodiversity. By tracking these macro changes, agencies can identify where pollinator habitats are being lost. Researchers use this data to map optimal environments for pollinators, identifying where habitats are fragmenting and where they can be reconnected. This image shows a solitary bee entering a nesting hole in a drilled board. This is a low-tech human intervention designed to support wild pollinators where natural wood and stems are no longer available. Modifying agronomic practices, specifically by reducing the application of neonicotinoids, provides immediate relief to the immune systems of both managed and wild bee populations. Bees diverged from predatory wasps 100 million years ago, a shift that allowed flowering plants to dominate terrestrial ecosystems. They have already survived the mass extinction that ended the dinosaurs, but the human-driven stressors of the current era represent an extreme evolutionary hurdle, combining chemical exposure with the rapid loss of nesting sites. The agricultural systems we rely on are tethered to the health of these insects. Sustaining the biological networks that feed the world requires us to actively protect our side of this biological partnership.